For today's critical thought, I want to talk about the most scariest, most horrific thing that can happen to an indie developer. The worst possible thing imaginable is when your game leaves its own little bubble of hardcore fans and starts getting around to the mainstream, and what this means when it comes to approachability, feedback, and understanding who is the market for your game. Every video game, whether it is a super small indie game, a AAA game, quadruple A, penta A game, has to have a market and a consumer base for it, for obvious reasons. And one of the aspects that has helped a lot of indie developers, especially in terms of growing their own brand and kind of doing underground marketing, is attracting a very niche and very vocal hardcore fan base. The more niche or nichier your game is, the more specific that audience is going to be, you're going to find people who will love it. And this is very important because you need somebody to be interested in your game. But the issue that we see time and time again from a lot of indie developers is as the game grows and takes on a life of its own, it escapes that hardcore bubble. It is now being mentioned by people who haven't been following this game's development for 2, 5, 7, 10 years. People who don't know that you've been working on this game using, a private chat room for all development for the last 3 years. Or that you've done all your communication through forums and networking and stuff like that. And when games kind of reach this kind of mainstream Rubicon situation, it can lead to a lot of developers suddenly faced with the fact that people who have not been following their games for months, years, decades, or whatnot are now taking a crack at it. And this is kind of where the rubber meets the road for a lot of developers, especially if they're trying to grow themselves as a studio and as a brand. Now, I'm not going to be naming the game or showing you any footage of said game from the Stinger for very obvious reasons, and the footage that I'm going to be showing for this video will probably just B-roll some other games that we've played. And for a lot of developers who have made very niche, very specifically designed titles, there is, again, this laser focus on what the audience and what is the core gameplay and the experience of this game is supposed to be. If you look at something like the Fear and Hunger games, they are exceptionally niche games. These are not games that are going to be kind of shown at like your local GameStop or Target or Walmart anytime soon. And that is just kind of like the tip of the iceberg. If we look at the vast majority of games that have been released on itch over the last, I guess we're now going on even 7-8 years now. I don't even remember how old itch is at this point. And when these games start getting noticed by more people, it leads to this conversation of, what do I do with this knowledge? Because if you're just going to focus on either extreme, making your game super more mainstream, making it even more niche, you oftentimes end up burning the candle at least one or both ends. If you go entirely mainstream, try to appease every single voice that comes in your game, you oftentimes end up with a title that just feels unfocused, that doesn't appeal to the hardcore fans who stuck with you, it's not doing enough to appeal to the people who came in after the fact, and it just doesn't appeal to anyone. If you remember that game Soldiers that we played, I think it's like a few years ago, that they ran into that issue where they were trying to make the game more approachable and easier without really understanding why people were having complaints about it. And what ended up happening was they did a lot of updates and rebalancing, and it just didn't really help the underlying issues. The people who found the game easier, they played a little bit longer, but they still weren't sticking around. And the hardcore fans who enjoyed the brutal at the beginning are now annoyed with the developer for, caving to the casual audience. Now, if you focus too much on the hardcore side, if you're just all in on making your game as brutally difficult as possible, about not listening to any and every feedback that comes in, then your hardcore fans aren't be really happy. They've always stuck with you through thick and thin. What's another little issue? But it completely and utterly destroys your games and your studio's chance at growing any more than that. And this is a point where someone's going to type a comment down below and saying, well, who cares? Who cares if my game is not reaching 5, 10, 15 million people worldwide? Maybe I'm only happy with 100,000 fans, 50,000, 20, 10, 5,000 fans. But as we've said time and time and again, one of the most important aspects, especially for long-term survivability in the game industry, is you want to be growing your fan base from game to game. Because if you think that if your first game sold 100,000 copies, that you have 100,000 guaranteed fans for your next one, it's not happening. It will never happen like that. And you want to be hedging your bet every single time. You want to be making it easier for people to find your games. And it is an incredibly tough line to walk as a developer in terms of who am I trying to appeal to? Who am I trying to reach out to? Because it's incredibly easy just to say, well, you know what? I want to sit with the hardcore fans. They all love everything that I do. I don't want to listen to anyone else. But you see, this is often this trap that I see from a lot of first-time and even established developers, where they'll take every complaint as kind of the same level of importance, or a lack of importance. Somebody complaining that your turn-based RPG doesn't have enough headshots and quick swapping. Yeah, okay, you don't really need to listen to that one. But if people are complaining, I find your game incredibly slow to play, or it's getting very boring and repetitive, that's kind of a problem. And it's, again, why we see massive churn for a lot of games. Where, again, it will go from 100 to 60 to 20 to 10 within a span of an hour. And again, for people who are coming in new saying I'm making that up, no. That is actually quite accurate for a lot of indie games. That they will lose a huge amount of their audience or the consumer base within 60 minutes of play. And again, if you only treat feedback or praise from your hardcore audience as it, you are severely handicapping your game and your studio's ability to grow. But again, herein lies the problem. If people are complaining about something that is intrinsic to the core gameplay of your title, if your game is a hardcore survival crafter, it is supposed to be brutally difficult. You have to survive by the inch of your every resource. You have to stretch it out entirely. And someone comes in and says, well, why can't I just have infinite water? Or all my tools have infinite durability? Again, it gets to this point where you have to sit down and decide what is bendable about my design and what is kind of set in stone. And it's a lot harder than what I just said. Because developers will have, again, this mentality to either look at all feedback equally or discount all feedback equally. Especially if your game is trying to appeal to a specific audience or you're trying to reach out more beyond it. Because like I said a few minutes ago, there is that risk that you change your game so much that you end up with something that's not going to appeal to everyone. And now someone's going to chime in and say, well, what about Souls-likes? What about Elden Ring and Sekiro and, every From Software game released in the past 14 years now? And the answer to that is, who cares? From Software at this point has clout. They are an outlier and an exception to what we're talking about today. Any major name, any prestige title is kind of the rule breaker in this regard, where it is a matter of kind of like gamer pride to play an Elden Ring or to play a Armored Core or whatever, or Last of Us, Mario, stuff like that. As an indie developer, you don't have that luxury. You're not going to have people willing to play your game just because it's a big name on Steam. And again, if you do reach that point as any developer, then more power to you. But when you are looking at feedback, especially when your game is meant to be challenging to begin with, this is one of the biggest traps in this topic. If you're building a hardcore game, whether it's a hardcore strategy game, shooter, RPG, cooking sim, survival sim, dancing, music, whatever, one of the easiest ways that you can add fans to your existing game is to look at approachability and onboarding. A lot of developers, especially when they make hardcore games, have this mindset that the only way my game will be more appealing is to make it harder, to add more difficulty, one-hit kill modes, one hit if you blink while you're playing the game, your webcam picks up your character dies immediately modes. And hardcore fans will jump at these modes. They will love the super difficult, masochistic 0.0001% clear rate on Steam. But a lot of people don't want that. And one of the aspects that we've seen in terms of kind of mainstreaming roguelike design over the past 7 years now has again been designing this game under the assumption that the normal or intended playthrough should be considered standard or on the easier side for most people. If someone wants to beat a game like Slay the Spire or Monster Train or even something like Hades with no additional difficulty modifiers, no difficulty adjustments whatsoever, there's a good chance once they've learned that game that they can do it. Then we go up the Ascensions and the progressive difficulty and the pack of punishment. And now we're adding that bite to the people who want it. And it is, again, a very tough line for a lot of developers to walk like this. That if your game is meant to be super hardcore, adding in easy modes, infinite health, infinite ammo, stuff like that, can seem like a cheat or, you're insulting your hardcore fan base. But what we've seen again is that games that have a very wide and interesting spectrum in terms of difficulty have a very robust and very diverse audience and fan base. If you look at something like Ultra Kill, despite the super difficult challenges and hardcore music and the fact that it's called Ultra Kill, their fan base is very diverse thanks to the incredible wide spectrum of difficulty levels. Playing Ultra Kill on the very easy setting and playing it on the absolute highest setting are completely different experiences. And again, someone playing on the easy mode is not going to be interacting with someone on the hardcore mode and vice versa. If you only focus on making your game harder, or only treating your game that should be this incredibly difficult game with no exceptions, nothing whatsoever, then you are, again, cutting out a lot of people who may be potentially interested in your game. Again, the majority of people who play video games these days are not finishing it. We have not seen a game in the past 7-10 years that has had a 100% clear rate. It's, at this point, statistically not possible for that. But you want as many people to enjoy your game, or at least end your game on a happy note. Because that is the audience that's going to come back for your next game, and the game after that. And if you're putting or leaving stuff in that people find frustrating or annoying, who haven't spent 800 hours in this game or have been following your forum for the past decade, you may want to listen to them or at least look at having options or means of giving them some kind of adjustment. And again, it doesn't mean completely changing your game. If you still want a hardcore experience, you can provide that in many different ways. But for the newcomers, for people who are just checking this out, this is the audience you want to be listening to about onboarding and UI UX issues. Because again, time after time and time again, the hardcore fan base of any game is terrible when it comes to spotting UI UX problems with a game. They will treat everything as just part of the experience. How dare you add auto-sorting to my ARPG, or quest markers on a map? People do like that. People do want some of these issues, or some of these quality of life. And again, if someone doesn't want that, give them the option to turn that off. And as one final point, when it comes to understanding when your game breaks out to the mainstream, always have a difficulty setting or a kind of a mode or something that is considered standard. That is the standard, normal, baseline experience. Most people who will play a game are going to stick at that. People who want a challenge, they will immediately go to super difficult mode. But you want to make sure that what is considered standard for your game is as accommodating as possible. And again, you will have someone who may bite off more than they can chew. I never played the genre before, and I started playing on Mega Nightmare mode, and I died in one hit. What gives? And like I said, part of good feedback and understanding the consumer is being able to parse what they're saying to you. Again, at some point in any game's design, you are going to have to stand steadfast as to what your game is. If you're building a strategy RPG and someone's complaining, well, why are you making a racing game? Why don't you just add MMO level multiplayer to this game? It'll only take a few days. Again, that's a kind of comment that you can kind of put away in your mind, never have to think about. But if people are saying, I'm getting lost in your game, this is confusing to me, I can't figure this out, and every hardcore fan in your audience is dunking on them and making fun of them, a warning light should be going off in your mind right now. So here's the final super mega ultra point for today. If people are struggling with a specific aspect of your game, I'm not talking about just like one random person who completely fills your forum with, this game sucks, this game's horrible, I can't play it, is this game, gone woke? Those kinds of people, they're not going to be the ones you want to be listening to. But if you're getting constant and consistent feedback from people, playtesters, and general consumers that they're having trouble learning your game, it's confusing to them, they're not getting it, those problems are your problems. Because a lot of developers out there will immediately go, well, it's the consumer's fault. It's the gamer's fault because they couldn't understand my tutorial. I figured it out. And a UI UX expert just had a heart attack as I uttered those words. Whenever a game breaks out into the mainstream for whatever reason, there is always this kind of test point that happens. Will a developer listen to feedback outside their hardcore audience? Will they add accommodations and approachability features? Or will they double down and keep things hard, make things harder? And for developers who strike that balance right, they'll be able to grow and have a larger audience than they originally thought. And again, sometimes a game's only niche because people didn't hear about it. But again, if you refuse or you're not understanding why someone who hasn't spent 10,000 hours in a genre is having trouble with your game or struggling with something, you're going to be hurting your audience. And here's another very salient point about this. These issues that I'm mentioning, your hardcore fans are probably experiencing them as well. They're probably having those same frustration points and not liking it. But because they're already hardcore fans, they're willing to put up with those kinds of pain points and that kind of rough edges on your game. But people who aren't following you, they won't do that. Again, you do not need a lot of reasons to stop playing a game, refunding it, and never looking at that developer ever again. And if you don't learn these lessons, if you refuse to learn them, and you're not understanding why someone may not enjoy this or someone finds something confusing, then you're going to end up hurting your game and your studio in the long run. And some of the best games that we've seen, again, will come up with clever solutions to these issues. They'll add better GUI elements, better UX UI work. They will do things that they can to make a game easier to learn or make it more approachable. But they still understand that there are people who want that challenge, who want that bite. And they will put it there for those that want it. Think about like someone who likes super burning your mouth hot sauce versus someone who doesn't. The person who likes the ghost pepper hot sauce, they're not going to care about your super sweet brand, and vice versa. But if you want your audience, your market to grow, you want to look at ways of accommodating a larger majority of people. Because if you can do this, if you can square that circle, you'll end up with a very healthy fan base of people who will play every one of your games because they like you and what you do as a studio. Not just the people who are here for that one very laser-focused, specific experience that if you do not deliver 100% exact each and every time, they will leave and never come back. Because once you lose your hardcore fans, if you try to break out in some other way, you're going to find that you have no new fans and no old fans. And then you are in a lot of trouble. For those of you, especially for the indie developers watching this, can you think of cases where your game kind of broke out of its own bubble? And what did you do, or did you do anything to make things more accommodating or understanding feedback from people who don't have 10,000 hours in your game? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.